Okay, so I decided to just make this video because I've been wanting to make a video about this, but I never do any of the things that I really need or want to do. But that's another story, and I don't want to start emotional dumping. I kind of started this off a little depressing. But since I'm in pain, and I have been for like maybe it's been a week or two, I can't do anything else, so I might as well make this, especially since I seen this comment. It reminded me that I needed to make this anyway. So, this kind of reminds me of something that I've talked about before, which is that people don't want to accept the realities of sex trafficking. People in the US already don't believe in it because, even in, what was that, the 80s, our government had basically got all the media to tell people that sex trafficking was just a conspiracy and it was labeled off as satanic panic, and the quote unquote the kids who were bleeding from the rectum, well, toddlers at that, were just, what do they say? They were just lying and they were just quote unquote schizophrenic. That term is always thrown up in situations like this. But like I realized a while ago, mental illness comes from trauma anyway. So once I realized that, it just made me think about how when somebody's mentally ill, it should just be more proof of whatever they're saying happened. And then they were saying the DID wasn't real and that, yeah, I don't even really know what I was about to say. But all of that happened, and so it was covered up in the 80s. And a lot of people still don't believe in sex trafficking, even when they're living in the hot spots. And then there's a lot of people that think it's just prostitution and that it's just about having sex with people. There is prostitution, trafficking, or sometimes I call it prostitution, sex trafficking, because I really want people to know that that's completely different from global sex trafficking. And in global sex trafficking, people who have gotten out will even tell you that, I don't know if my background is hearable, but I think there's a baseball game going on. I really don't know what's happening. But they'll tell you that having sex is actually the easiest part. As far as the prostitution trafficking, that can happen with kids or adults, but you can probably get into global sex trafficking from that, but those are not the same thing. And commonly with prostitution, people go into that voluntarily. You can get stuck in there, and then it's like a hostage situation. But that could also happen for the global one sometimes, although a lot of people in the global one is either because CPS is trafficking them or they were born into it. Not that the people don't sometimes get kidnapped and brought into that too. Then there's the talk about the kids go missing at the border a lot. So trafficking is something that does happen, that people won't admit happens, or they won't admit how bad it is. And nobody ever wants to do anything about any of these things that go on. Because I noticed that whenever I talk about people coming together and standing up against these abusers and rescuing people, people start getting mad and saying that wanting to go to war with traffickers is just being as sadistic as they are. It's like people are in this weird brainwashed mindset when wherever you talk about justice or just doing the right thing in general, people start acting like you're the bad guy. But anyway, the other thing that isn't talked about with a lot of these missing persons cases is that some of these people aren't missing. And so there's two ways this could go. Well, there's probably more than two, but I'm going to name two. So one is the one where, what was it that I was going to say? That's the one where the parents report the kid missing, but really the kid is in the house, and that's what they do when they want to kill the kid. So they'll pretend that they're missing, and they'll have the police looking. Like there was a case some years back where some parents did this, and then the kid was found in some box in the basement or something like that. If I can find it, I'll put it in the description. But then there's the situations where people under 18 realize that there is no system put in place to help and that nobody's going to help and none of the mandated reporters are going to help. So they take it upon themselves to leave abuse situations. And then some people do end up getting into trafficking. That does happen. But then there's also a good amount that are able to avoid that. Not that, like, you always have a choice, of course, because I know you can do everything right and bad things can still happen. But some people are able to avoid this and then just wait it out till 18. But I'm assuming sometimes maybe the police don't take them out the missing persons database. I don't know, because I've heard stories of people who had to run away when they were young, getting calls from the center, what is it called? The Center for Missing and Exploited Children in their 20s, asking them if anybody ever found them and stuff like that. So, I mean, for one, the police don't look and they don't care. So, I guess that's another reason they'll never take into account that the person isn't being trafficked or dead. But that's something that's really not talked about, though. And then nobody actually wants to do anything or put children's shelters in place where people under 18 can go to them. Or at least in the US, they don't have shelters for people under 18. They don't have those, so nobody wants to put anything in place. So people under 18 who are leaving bad situations can go there without them having to call CPS and the police and get parents' permission. Because if you do try to go to one under 18, they're going to want to do all that, and a lot of them won't keep you anyway. And then, of course, once the police get involved, they just get sent back home or locked up and sent back home. Or they go home, then their parents can press charges on them. And what was it? Oh, yeah, they go to jail. And I bet just like with the whole CP thing I made a video about, those could probably be used, especially in racial situations, to keep them from getting a job. These weird charges that underage abuse victims commonly pick up in abuse situations from their abusers. Like, I knew situations where the person was 12 getting charged by their abuser with domestic violence and CP, and, well, the police give them the CP charge and other weird stuff, and then the school was trying to charge them with truancy because they couldn't go to school because they were getting made fun of for their abuse symptoms. And I knew a person who stopped going to school not only because they were getting made fun of by teachers and students for their abuse symptoms, but they were also basically being sexually exploited by people at the school. And that's kind of a long story, but I mean, there's a couple situations like that I've seen with people who have been sexually abused, and so then they fall into the promiscuity and selling news and stuff, and then they get blackmailed, and then things go really, really left. There was even one case some years back where the person ended up making a video about how they were committing suicide, and eventually the parents and everybody was able to get as many of the videos about that situation that she made taken down. And it's like everybody got together, the schools, the parents, and the police, to cover up that whole situation and then make it to where people just slowly forgot about it. Because that happened in the 2010s. But I still don't remember what her name is, so I can't even remember how old I was when that happened. But yeah. So, I'm trying to think of something else to say. Okay, wait a minute. I guess a side thing that I can say is that sometimes when people have to leave abuse situations on their own because they realize the fact that the situation is really bad, and if they don't get out, they'll never be able to really do anything in life, or they'll probably end up dying in this situation. And so something that commonly happens after leaving at 18 plus is having to fight over vital records. And at least here, and I'm sure in many other places, if you don't have vital records, then you really can't do anything. You can't get a job, you can't get a house or any of that. And so some people get into vital record fights at 18, either with CPS or foster parents or birth parents or guardians or whatever. And then that really messes them up, and then they can't do anything, and then they're stuck homeless 18 plus. And also, they're not able to even really go to the police and say that they're okay because they don't really have any proof that they are who they say they are, unless they still look similar to the missing persons report. And that's if there's a report. Because if there is no report, that could make proving your identity and getting vital records back a lot harder, depending on where you are. Because there are some states that have good homeless programs to help people figure out who you are, but you would also have to know your full name and the city and state you were born in. And some people don't know that. And then also there's situations where abuse victims aren't allowed to get an ID, and if they could at least get an ID, that makes it easier to get SSN and birth certificate at 18. But if they can't get that, then it makes it a lot harder, because then they have no proof that they are the person whose SSN is what they're trying to get. So there's a lot of different scenarios that happen with missing people that aren't talked about. And of course, sex trafficking is a little more talked about now, but still people won't ever really talk about the reality of what all goes on in there. And the whole runaway thing and people under 18 having to leave abuse situations, that's something that's really never talked about. In fact, people are commonly scared out of and guilt tripped out of leaving abuse situations under 18 and even at 18 plus. In fact, not only that, but also with emancipation, I noticed that, especially in support groups and ones that are for legal advice and not youth rights, any person under 18 you have to be under 18 to get emancipated. So any teen or kid who talks about wanting to get emancipated, they're quickly guilt-tripped, gaslit, cursed out, and even threatened by adults who, for whatever reason, feel really, really mad about teenagers wanting to get emancipated so they can actually have a normal, healthy life. And I still find it so crazy that people get as mad as they do whenever teenagers talk about wanting or needing to get emancipated. Of course, they make that process really, really hard. I know I couldn't even figure out how to get the case started when I tried, but it probably would have been really hard anyway. Because, like, sometimes you have to already have a job and stuff, but teens who are in financial abuse situations and aren't allowed to work or aren't allowed to keep the money that they work for are going to have a harder time. I remember at one point when I had 2 jobs, somebody tried to junk talk me into believing that I didn't qualify. Because at first they were like, well, to get emancipated, you have to have a job first. And I was like, I already have 2 jobs. And they were like, just accept the fact that you don't qualify. So yeah, adults who either are jealous that other people are admitting that they're being abused, something that they can never do, even into their adulthood. So they feel jealous about that, or they feel like other abuse victims should just stick through it and stay in the family system like they did. They really get upset whenever abuse victims talk about leaving the situation. And then they try to talk them into not doing it the legal way, which usually is really hard to do anyway. And it's also really risky because the thing is, something that I've heard before is somebody's lawyer just having to threaten the parents into saying yes, because if the parents would have said no, then the teenager would have had to talk about why they're leaving and talk about all the different crazy abuse that was going on, even with the social worker, because they were in the foster care system, but they kept getting put back in the home. wait a minute, what was it? Oh yeah, if the parents would have said no, she would have had to talk about her abuse, she being the teenager. Then CPS would have had to get involved, and that would have slowed the whole process down. And that would have also meant that the younger siblings, or really any siblings who are under 18 and still in the home, would have had to be removed if CPS would have actually cared enough to remove them. But still, the case would have slowed down the emancipation process and got in the way of it. And I remember a lot of times where people claim social workers will help you get emancipated. First of all, I mean, there may be some that are nice enough to try to help with that, but their supervisor isn't going to like that, because even when they're not full-blown sex trafficking kids, CPS and other parts of the Cash for Kids system do legal trafficking. And they make a lot of money off the kid, so they're not going to want the kid to get emancipated, because then obviously they lose their money because they basically become a legal adult. And it almost seems like people are more likely to talk junk to you about wanting to get emancipated than even the other option of running away. But sometimes there's a third option, and that third option is suicide. So people will, I mean, unless they're like just really mean and have attitude, they'll try to tell you don't do the suicide, but then a lot of adults will still talk junk about the emancipation option. And it's really weird to me though, but I mean, emancipation, I haven't heard too many situations where it's actually worked. That's one thing I can say. Getting the process started is really hard, and then you have to go against your parents in court and all that. And that's just some of the reasons why a lot of people rather just do the runaway option, but then the risk with that is legal trouble. But that's only if they care enough to even look. And the thing is, something that people should know when leaving abuse situations is that, I mean, unless your parents are rich and get a private investigator, the police really don't care anyway. But sometimes if you're 14 or younger, the FBI automatically get involved, although I've seen in West Virginia, or either Virginia, especially if the person is a repeated runaway, once the person is 12, the police stop caring. So, okay, what was I about to say? Dang, wait a minute. Okay, hold up. Okay, it took me about 5 minutes, but I finally remember what I was saying. So, unless your parents have the money for a private investigator, or you're 14 or younger, the real thing that actually gets people caught isn't the parents, it's not the news, and it's not the police. It's, well, I mean, just in case people do see any articles or whatever, it's actually anonymous tips. Especially once money is put on your head. If money is put on your head, then a lot of people will start talking. So, like the situations where parents will say, if you find my kid and tell me where my kid is at, I'll give you $1,000. I mean, it could even be a lot less than that. But money makes people start snitching and getting in other people's business. And so, there's that. And then what I like to call let me help you lunatics. And if anybody remembers the last year's situation, when I had actually originally made up the term let me help you lunatics, then you'll know why I even called it this. But basically, to make a long story short, a let me help you lunatic is somebody who claims that they want to help you even if you say you don't need help, and then they constantly put you in situations or try to get you in situations that do nothing but put you at risk of getting turned in and stuff. And then other situations that just put you in a worse situation than you were already in and you're trying to get out of. And also, they can be crazy. That's not really why I put the lunatic in there, but they can be very crazy. I'm trying to think of what else I could say. They're manipulative. They don't take accountability when you tell them that they're really not respecting your boundaries or even the fact that you're saying you don't need help and that nothing that they're doing is helping or could possibly help and they can't even help themselves. Then they'll start getting manipulative and say things like, you're just, what was it that lady said? I haven't done S to you, and I feel like you're just acting like, or lumping me with people who've done things to you in the past and projecting or like something like that. Basically, they'll try to tell you it's just your trauma or whatever, and that they're not really doing anything to you. Even if you specifically told them that you don't even want to be around them, and then they keep finding reasons to come around you and quote unquote help you. Some will try to use you as a charity case and be like, look what I'm doing for this homeless kid. I could really keep going, to be honest. But whenever you meet people like that, stay away from them. Because even if they don't end up turning you in themselves, them running around telling your business to everybody, reporting you to the police, will either get you in jail or have a whole bunch of people knowing about your business who either will try to get you in jail or will do something to you because they're not a safe person. And then the thing is, there are a lot of people, which is why I don't like saying I need help. I mean, obviously, because I really don't. But there are a lot of people who, even if you tell them how the Cash for Kids system is, and that if they call the police, you're just going to go to jail and get charged with something crazy and be put back in a bad situation. But a lot of people are so in denial about the stuff that goes on in the world to where they'll just bypass that. And then there's this manipulative thing that people like to do where they'll act like they believe and they understand why you're worried. And basically, I'll give an example. They'll be like, I understand why you may feel that way, but I'm telling you, these people are going to help. Kind of like that last year's lady at the Hathaway house who lied to everybody and turned me in while I was asleep. Which is why I shouldn't have went to that place anyway. Although one thing I can say is that the first time you try to leave a bad situation, depending on how bad your situation is, getting caught could be extremely, extremely risky, even deadly, or getting turned in. But sometimes it's like after the first attempt and then things go really, really left, it could help you know what to do and what not to do. Even though the things that made everything go left was stuff that I really didn't agree to anyway, but still. And then also, you would never want to leave a situation kind of like what's the word? Dang. Wait a minute. It's I don't even know the word, but basically, what you don't want to do, you don't want to just, okay, let's say something bad just happened, and then all of a sudden, because the situation is really, really bad, you get into a fight or flight, and then you want to flight. You kind of don't really want to do that, because if you leave without a plan, if you leave without at least trying to get vital records, especially if you know that a report isn't going to be put out on you, because I do feel like, depending on if you go to the police and say, I'm the person from this report, maybe something could happen with them trying to prove that you are that person, where they can help you get your vital records if you don't already have them, but also that could get family involved, but that could go kind of left, but still, especially if you know that there isn't going to be a report, what you really, really want to do, regardless, really, is try to get vital records. And then you also want to possibly have money, or maybe have some type of debit card, definitely not one that your guardians will be over, because if you're under 18, you can't have a bank account without some guardian or whoever that's 18 plus being over. So you want to get some other type of debit card that's not under a relative, or it's like a prepaid or whatever. Because the thing is, if you kind of leave out of a fight or flight thing, it could go pretty bad, because you didn't really have a time to think out options or where to go or how to get where. You didn't get to plan anything out. So that could go really, 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 really bad. It was funny because that's kind of what happened last year, even though I had already been realizing that I needed to get out of my situation, but it's still pretty funny looking back. It's like I had been knowing that I needed to get out, and I had been planning, but right then and there, it was kind of like a quick thing that didn't go how I wanted it to go, for one. But you always have to have backup plans too, for just in case something goes really, really left. But yeah, anyway, these are the different situations for why people could go missing. This is probably not as good as it could have been of a video, but it's whatever though.